Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today I've got an old friend and business associate. I don't know exactly how to describe him, but I'd have to say, first and foremost to me, he's always been a journalist and an editor and a biologist, a business manager. Ken Bailey, welcome to Harvest Your Own.
Thanks, Brad. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, we go back a long ways. I remember years ago when I started working for Ducks Unlimited, I believe you were the area manager in Tofield.
That's right. That would go back to, the late 80s, I suppose. Yeah, because I think I was in Tofield as the area manager from, about 84 or 5 to 89 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we both went to Lethbridge Community College, which is now Lethbridge Polytechnique, I believe they call it. And I remember when I was going there, you had your face on some of their brochures because you had just finished the course.
Yeah, I think I was, 2 years ahead of you maybe, or a year ahead of you?
I think it was 2, yeah.
Yeah,
so it's been interesting. And then over the years, we actually shared an office for a while when you were editor of the Outdoor Edge magazine.
Yes, at that time you were with the Fish and Game Association, and I lived in the basement. And
right.
we ran the Outdoor Edge from down there.
Yeah, so the reason we have you on today is we want to talk a little bit about hunting outside of Canada. You know, there's and a world of adventure out there is the best way to put it. And not everyone thinks about it. You know, a lot of Harvest Your Own listeners are trying to get into hunting, but this sort of plants the seed to create a bucket list of things that you might consider or just think about. Sometimes when you reflect on it, it makes you realize just how lucky we are to be in Alberta.
Yeah, the great thing about living in Alberta like we do is you really don't have to go very far to find new places and new excitement as a hunter or an angler. There's lots of variety here. But as you know, most of us who are hunters, we grew up, as explorers, sort of, even as little kids. We were wanderers, we're peregrinators. We like seeing what's around the next corner. And, I think as we get older and get into the outdoor sports, it's only natural that we want to keep looking over the horizon and keep seeing what's next out there.
Absolutely. I think your description of a wanderer and someone that had his nose into anything nature was me as a kid. Couldn't get enough of it. Every outdoor magazine that I could get my hands on, I devoured it and read it cover to cover.
Yeah,
So.
I was the same way. And, even before I was particularly active as an outdoors person, I knew my interests were there as a hunter. And, I remember I don't know how old I would be, 12 or 13 or something, going to the local sportsman shows and just coming home with a garbage bag full of brochures because you picked up every one you saw because you were just fascinated by the rifles and the shotguns and the fishing rods and the trips around the world. And like you say, I just devoured that stuff and started dreaming young.
Yeah, absolutely. Where'd you grow up?
Well, my father was an Air Force pilot. So I actually was born in England.
Wow.
I'm what they call a Canadian born abroad. Even though I was born in England, I was born a Canadian citizen because it was on a Canadian Air Force base there. And then when we first came to Canada, when I was 3, I think, I went to Winnipeg, spent a few years there, then went to Nova Scotia, spent a few years there, then to Ontario, and spent, I think, 7 or 8 years there, and then moved back to Winnipeg for my last 2 years of high school. And that's where my father retired, and that's where my family sort of is to this day. So I kind of think I'm from Winnipeg, but the fact of the matter is I only spent 2 years there, grades 11 and 12, and then off to school, and I've never moved back.
Right. It's interesting. Maybe that's why you've got an adventuresome side, because your family moved around, and it was almost a lifestyle that forced you to try new things and experience new things and be different places.
Yeah, I think you're right, Brad. As I like to say in my family, I blame my father for my gypsy blood, and I blame my mother for my prematurely white hair. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun way to put it. How did you get started hunting?
I guess, like I say, I always had the urge. I was fascinated. I don't know if you were like this, Brad, but I never had any doubt about what I was going to do or be when I grew up. I just had this passion for wildlife, and I knew that my professional life would somehow involve wildlife. There was never any real decision making there. I was going to be Jacques Cousteau, or I didn't know what, but I was going to work in the wildlife world. And it was just a natural extension of that, I think, that got me fascinated, as a kid out there, whether it was a fishing rod in hand. And my father had kind of put away his guns before I was old enough to go hunting. He didn't do it any longer, but just, I guess it started when I was in high school in Ontario, and had a friend with a farm, and we would go out there. He had 22s, and we'd go out there and shoot woodchucks. And it was as simple a start as that, and then everywhere it kind of went from there. I picked it up. I was really fortunate when I moved to Winnipeg for my last 2 years of high school. I fell in with a fellow who's my best friend to this day, and as a matter of fact, just got an email from him this morning. He's coming out to hunt with me for a week again this fall. And his family were real ardent waterfowlers, and I had the passion. I played around with a shotgun and shot a few grouse and things before, but he introduced me really to, and his father to hunting. In a sort of a systematic way. And so, my first hunting experiences were largely around the Oak Hammock Managed Wildlife Area, north of Winnipeg there. And we'd go out and shoot ducks and geese, and, it gets in the blood, man, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
And there was no turning back from there.
It's highly addictive is what I say. It's a real passion in life, and I know it is for you. Wing shooting is probably your favorite by far.
Somebody asked me that recently. If they took away all your licenses and you could only keep one, which
right.
one would you hang on to? And I think it would be my waterfowl license. Yeah, I love my duck hunting. I'm not a real big goose hunter per se anymore, but I love my duck hunting. I love my big water duck hunting. Yeah,
very rewarding.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
You've traveled abroad a fair bit.
Yeah, I have. I've been lucky. Again, I think it stems from dreaming as a kid, right? And being fascinated by the stories of lions and tigers and bears, oh my, kind of thing, all around the world. And as an outdoors enthusiast and as a hunter, I just the urge was always there. So my first trip of any note outside of Canada, I was 29 years old, and Africa I couldn't get it out of my head. I had no money. I was 29 years old, working in a non-profit company for Ducks Unlimited, and great rewards working there, but you're not getting wealthy. But I was determined I had to go to Africa. So I had a friend who shared that passion. He may have taught you at Lethbridge College, John Nagy.
Yes.
And So we decided we're going to Africa, and I'll never forget. We went for 28 days.
Wow.
I went to the bank and I borrowed $7,000 in whatever that was, 87. I didn't have the money to go, but I was going to go, and I took out a bank loan to do my first trip, and could only afford to hunt for 5 days, and then we went on a 21-day photo safari that was low rent. I mean, this was, you pitched your own tent every night, you cooked your own meal over the fire every night, but you traveled around, and we traveled around Botswana and South Africa and Zimbabwe, and, you know, we're camping in the wilderness. And but I got the taste of hunting there too. I hunted for 5 days, and it was just absolutely thrilling. And from there, I was always looking for my next opportunity to travel to hunt or fish.
It fueled the desire. It didn't quench it.
That's a great way of putting it, Brad.
Yeah. Interesting. How many times have you been back?
I think I've been to Africa 12 times now. Yeah. An interesting story, if we got a minute here. So a number of years back, Outdoor Canada was putting on trade shows, sportsman shows in Toronto. And you know me well enough. I'm not really a seminar guy. I'm not comfortable necessarily in front of big crowds talking about some of these things. And but because I was their hunting editor, I had to come down. And so I went down and did some seminars for them. And in between seminars in this show, I was wandering around and saw a booth for a magazine called the African Hunting Gazette. So interested, and I'd been to Africa at one point, once at that point, and so I went over and looked and talked to the girl who was running it, and before I left, I signed up for a 2 or 3 year subscription. Now, fast forward a year later, I think, and I was at the SCI convention. I believe it was in Reno then, and I'm wandering around the convention, and I see that same booth, and I start walking over, and this young lady sees me and recognizes me. And, hey, Ken, come here. I want you to meet somebody. And she says, Richard, this is Ken Bailey. Do you remember we did that sportsman show in Toronto last year for 4 days? And I only sold one subscription? This is the guy who bought that one and only subscription.
Wow.
And so I met Richard Lendrum, who is the publisher of the African Hunting Gazette. And since that time, we've become pretty fast friends. I do a lot of writing for his magazine, and I go over, and he and I kind of go on African adventures together every year. So
yeah, it's interesting. I was in Africa last year and stayed at Alton House. Is that how you pronounce it? Afton House.
Yeah,
which Richard is part owner of. And I got there, and we started talking. He's like, we came to the conclusion we know Ken Bailey, and he phoned you immediately. I don't know what time of the day it was in North America, but we had a quick chat and then went about our business. Yeah,
and I gave Richard a little bit of heck for that because he didn't tell me you were there, and that you were listening in, and I'll never forget this. And he called and he said, "Ken, I got this guy who's calling here, and he doesn't have a place to stay, and we're full." But he says he knows you. His name is Brad Fenson, and like, I'm full. Like, should I be trying to do anything to help this guy? and I said, "Yeah, Brad's a good guy. Find a spot for him." And then all of a sudden he starts laughing and and I told him, I said, "You're lucky it was Brad Fenson. There might have been some people who I said leave him at the airport." Yeah.
Interesting times. Richard is very well versed on African hunting. The African Gazette is an incredible source of information on everything.
Yeah.
I noticed you had a couple of your trophies in his accommodations, which was nice.
Yeah. Again, as you and I both know, the accumulation of taxidermy can get out of hand for hunters sometimes, and quite frankly, I have limited space in my home for more. And so it's been a real benefit. Richard is building a big trophy room there because all the guests who come and stay with him are hunters, usually between arriving in South Africa and their outfitter picking them up. he beds them and feeds them for a day or two, and he's built a big trophy room. And so, I've been lucky to have been able to harvest animals there, and not feel obligated to bring the trophy home to a home that has no space for them. So
right.
he's had them mounted, and they're on display there, and it's great. Yeah.
And I think that's an important message because we can do these things, but to me, it's not always about the trophy either. I haven't brought even close to the majority of my stuff home, but it's about the experience, the adventure. I relive it looking at things in my photographs as much as I would at looking at something on my wall.
Yeah, Brad, it's funny you say that. Somebody's asked me, why do you keep going back to Africa? And well, there's something about Africa, as you know, the diversity and abundance of wildlife and birds is just something that we don't see here. And as I tell people, my goal every time I go to Africa is actually to stay as long as I can and shoot as little as the outfitter will let me get away with. I want, as you say, I want the experience of being there and hunting and seeing the wildlife. I'm not really trying to pile up trophies or pile up dead animals. Yeah.
I always tell people I'm not a collector. I'm not going over there because I need one of each species or something else. I'm going over there for the experience, and I do have some goals. It's because certain animals are challenging or very regal. There's something about them that makes me want to pursue them. You've really taken to the wing shooting.
Oh, I have. I know you're a passionate wing shooter here, and I am as well. And so for the first many safaris, when I was in Africa, I'd see these birds everywhere, Franklin, which are an upland bird, sort of like our Hungarian partridge, although there's several species of Franklin, ducks and geese, guinea fowl. There's pigeons and doves that rival, Argentina, and then sand grouse. I'd read all about sand grouse in the old literature. Capstick, still, in his books, talked about how that's what put him on a psychiatrist's couch was trying to hunt sand grouse. And so I'd be seeing these birds all the time. And as a wing shooter, just, each time I went back, I thought, man, like, I should be trying to figure out how to hunt these. And so it started actually on a safari in Namibia, and my PH had grown up his raising pheasants for the royal family or some darn thing in England. And so he had this real wing shooting background as well. So when I told him about how interested I was, he said, oh, well, let's spend a few days and just chase birds. And that's when it really got embedded in me, the opportunity there and the diversity of wing shooting. And since then, I've probably been on, I don't know, half a dozen dedicated wing shooting safaris over there. I went on a 12-day or 14-day safari that went right from Cape Town in the extreme south of South Africa to Limpopo on the northern border. Yep. And we hunted every species you can think of, and they have some fantastic wing shooting there. Yeah,
they really do. It's how would you compare it to Canada?
How would I compare it to Canada? So in some ways, it's similar because the passionate wing shooters over there are no different than the passionate wing shooters here. They've got great working dogs, right? So the duck and goose guys have Labrador retrievers that are comparable to anything we see here. The upland bird hunters, I've shot over some fantastic pointing dogs over there, and they're again just as hardcore and passionate about their dogs and how important they are to the hunt as we are. So there's a lot of similarities. The waterfowling, again, you're hunting for the geese. You're hunting predominantly agricultural fields, much like we do, although over there it's liable to be corn or soy. But we set up just like you or I would here. And the ducks are generally all over ponds there. the water isn't as distributed. There's just not as much water on the landscape as what we're accustomed to here. So where there is water, there's ducks going into it, and they go in like clockwork. So that's how you shoot your ducks there, is over water. So, maybe the biggest difference in the wing shooting between North America and Southern Africa might be when you're sitting in a duck blind or a goose blind or pushing the uplands for Franklin. There's a good chance you'll see a kudu bust over the hill, or a giraffe, on the next, a mile over. Or it's the diversity and abundance of wildlife, particularly big game they have over there, that kind of adds a flavor to the wing shooting that maybe we don't see here. Although, as I think about it, I guess it's not unusual to see a white-tailed deer run across the field when we're goose hunting, but the diversity of species over there is fun.
Yeah, one of the things I really noted was that did you ever run into another group of hunters that's out for birds?
No.
Yeah.
No, I've never seen another wing shooting party when we've been out wing shooting.
And I don't think it's because they're not there. I think that it is just so abundant and widespread. Like, their wing shooting is absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to take part, you can basically, you find a field and go for a walk.
Right.
And it's not quite that simple. There's going to be some that are better than other because of the habitat or the food sources. But I mean, if you and I went down to Brooks to hunt pheasants, we're going to see other hunting parties somewhere. Over there, like, the bird hunting is very, I don't know what the right word is, exclusive. You have almost exclusive access to it.
Yeah, that's a good observation, because you're right. You just don't see other wing shooters there, although they're there. But there's so much opportunity and so little pressure on the birds there that everybody, I guess, has their own spot, and there's no competition for the birds you're hunting as a rule.
Right. You got a very diverse, interesting background. The habitat is abundant there. How does that occur versus in Alberta? Why do they have such diverse habitats and incredible populations of big game and birds?
I think there's a few things, Brad. And let's talk about South Africa for a minute, the country of South Africa. It's got a really diverse group of landscapes, much like Alberta does, right? So we have mountains, we have foothills, we have boreal forest, we have prairie, we have parkland, and each has its own suite of birds and mammals that thrive there. And South Africa's like that too. You've got the Drakensberg and the Eastern Cape mountain areas. You've got the Kalahari Desert area. You've got the Limpopo thornbush area. You've got the coastal areas. And so different climates, different soils, allow different types of mammals and birds to thrive. So I think that's a big part of it. The other thing in South Africa is, it wasn't that long ago, let's say within the last 30 years even, that many landowners realized that there was more economic benefit to them if they retained the natural habitat and essentially allowed wildlife to thrive on those properties and generated their revenue through hunting, as opposed to raising cattle or trying to grow agricultural crops. So the emphasis on the hunting industry over there has contributed hugely to the quantity and quality of natural wildlife habitat that's there.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information. To gain insight and knowledge, head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information, from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game, to make the connection between health and food.
Right. And so a lot of the wildlife management is independent. It is actual landowners.
Yes. One of the things in both South Africa and Namibia is largely you're hunting privately owned land, and in those countries, wildlife that is on your land is yours by kind of law. Many of the properties in those two countries are fenced, and that allows people to manage their wildlife effectively and sort of retain their investment, and be able to manage for its sustainability. So that's one of the big differences between where we come from, where wildlife is a publicly owned and managed resource.
Yeah. And not all African countries are like that. Some of them there are, we'll call them government owned, or they're owned by the people.
Yes. So, I've been lucky to hunt a few countries over there. And so you get into, Zimbabwe as an example. Most of those large hunting concessions are what we would call crown land here, or public land here, but government lands over there. Zambia is sort of the same way. Botswana, very similar. So there is that real dichotomy over there between the privately owned land and wildlife common in Namibia and South Africa, and the publicly owned land in some of the other countries there. Another one being Tanzania.
Wow. Yeah, I was very blessed last year to go and hunt the Timbavati, which is just outside of Kruger. It's adjacent. They took the fences down in the 1950s, and all of that private land, there's 56 different landowners actually manage the property, and they generate all of their revenue through hunting. So I was able to participate in that and understood their conservation model, because it is so much different than ours. A big part of their revenue streams is photo safaris, but they don't generate the same type of money. They actually pay for on-the-land wardens and habitat manipulation through hunting permits.
Yeah, that's a good observation, because one of the things we often hear from the anti-faction about Africa in particular is, why don't you close down the hunting and just run photo safaris? Well, the fact of it is, particularly where a lot of the hunting takes place, is quite remote and difficult to get to, difficult access even once you're there. The photo people don't really want to go there. They like these parks where everything is there and they can see an elephant in one corner and a lion in the other, and the revenue that they generate, it just isn't enough to pay to fully and properly manage the wildlife. Like you say, whether it's, anti-poaching patrols or breeding programs, you think of the recovery of the rhinoceroses.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right? Over there. And, that's pretty much been funded by the hunting community. And nobody's hunting these things, or very, very few. It's just hunters are the world's greatest conservationists. We always have been. We're always willing to put our money where our mouths are. You look here even at home. You and I both have worked in the nonprofit wildlife world, and you think of whether it's the Fish and Game Associations or the DUs or the Elks or the Ruffed Grouse Societies, or on and on and on, and all the money that comes into conservation programs because of largely the hunting community. And it's similar over there, not where they get their money, because it's not usually raised the same way, but it is coming from the hunting community. They're the ones who are willing to pay to conserve wildlife.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting model. It's a lot different than home. But, Alberta, everywhere I travel in the world, everyone dreams about coming here to hunt.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the truth? We kind of take for granted, unfortunately, what's in our own backyard. But you and I both know that, having traveled quite a bit, there's few places that have the diversity and abundance of wildlife in North America like Alberta does, and the quality of the wildlife we have. And, managing it is not without its issues. But if you get back to the 30,000 foot level, you go, holy smokes, we're pretty lucky to be living where we do.
Absolutely. I appreciate Alberta all the time. I sort of got my travel bug from reading Roark and Hemingway and Capstick. Is that where your desire to see abroad or travel abroad came from?
Yeah, certainly. Definitely fueled by those same authors and some others. I was actually fortunate enough to meet Peter Capstick on 2 different occasions back in my early days of going to the SHOT Show. And it was kind of like meeting a larger-than-life hero,
Wow.
And, I was just fascinated by his stories in particular, quite frankly, but others, like you say, whether it was Roark or Hemingway or John Hunter or some of these, and you just wanted to live that life. And the interesting thing is, most of them were writing about a previous time in Africa than what it is now. Things have changed considerably, Politics, of course, are always changing, and that impacts how wildlife gets managed. And things like technology and travel, and so everything's different than what it was back in the time most of them wrote about. I shouldn't say everything, because what hasn't changed is how cool it is, the wildlife over there, and how cool it is to be laying in a canvas tent at night and hearing a lion roaring or a leopard sawing, or hearing hippopotamus outside your tent as they're grazing on the grasses at night, and or seeing a black mamba cross your path while you're sneaking around after bushbuck or something. So there's some things that have certainly remained, and that's, I think, what kind of got us excited in the first place, was to experience those things ourselves.
Absolutely. And those authors had a real knack for describing that so that you were there. You could hear it, feel it, smell it, see it, like you were getting goosebumps and imagining that you were right there on their heels.
Yeah, that's a great observation too, because and with both you and I, working in the outdoor communication world, one of the things that has changed over time is that back then, and it wasn't that long ago, I'm talking, 70s, 60s, 50s and back, most of the outdoor writing focused around telling the story of an adventure, right? And that's what got us, captured in that, is our imagination kind of working overtime, wishing we were there and imagining we were there. The outdoor writing industry started changing, in the 80s and 90s, and even to today, where there's a whole lot more of the, kind of how to and the where to, and, gear based. And there's few, or certainly considerably fewer places where you can just read a good story about an experience somebody had. And
still my favorite by far.
Mine too. I like reading it the most, and I like writing it the most.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mentioning reading and writing, tell us a little bit about the book you put out here. I believe it was 2 years ago, because it was kind of like a Ken Bailey bucket list.
Well, I don't know that I really look at it quite that way, Brad. I guess maybe like most of us outdoor writers, we all think we have a book in us somewhere, if we're magazine guys, right? And at some point I decided, all right, it was time for me to kind of get a book out there. And when I sort of stood back and looked at what I'd done and what I'm passionate about and where I've been, I thought, Canada, and growing up like I did. I mean, I've lived in Nova Scotia, I've lived in BC, I've lived briefly on the territories border, and everywhere in between. I thought, I want to write about my experiences in Canada, that maybe we don't appreciate what we have in our own borders enough. And I'd been fortunate enough to see a lot of Canada with a rifle, a shotgun, a fly rod, a spinning rod in my hand. And those were the stories I wanted to tell. And so that was the basis for my book. And I call it No Place Like Home, because even though today we're talking about travels maybe beyond our border, there's lots to see within the borders of Canada. Huge diversity and huge opportunity, and some great people and some great places and some great outdoor experiences. And so that's what sort of formed the basis for my book. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd encourage people to read No Place Like Home. And I guess I got the bucket list because I probably added items to my list after reading the book. That's probably where that's stuck in my brain.
Well, good, because that's what I hoped it would do. You know, it was funny. The publisher who agreed to publish the book for me, we had a bit of a back and forth because they wanted a bunch of photos in there. And my vision had been, I don't want photos in there. I don't want a picture of me standing there with a big fish or sitting next to a deer or an elk or something. I thought, I want to inspire through the words. I want to try to inspire people to go see Canada by reading the story of what I was lucky enough to experience. And so if it did that for you and hopefully for some other people, then that was mission accomplished, because that really was my intent there, to encourage people and to hopefully inspire people a little bit to go see parts of Canada.
Yeah. Awesome. You know, I believe this will inspire people. Your story is about taking a bank loan for your first trip to Africa. If anyone reads your book and looks at some of the opportunities that you might not even imagined exist in Canada, they're pretty spectacular. But never forget where we live and the opportunities we have at home. There's great opportunities, whether you're out your back door or traveling halfway around the world.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Any parting words in terms of encouraging people to just make things happen rather than worrying about how to make ends meet or put it off for years?
Yeah, you know, we're all faced with life, right? I mean, we have houses and jobs and children and families and obligations, and there's 100 reasons to not go chase your dreams. And they're legitimate reasons in and of themselves, you know. But experiences are something you can keep with you the rest of your life. And, you know, I guess maybe because I was brought up in a family that moved around a lot, you know, I grew up understanding that this world is a big place and you're better off for having seen more and more of it. So as difficult as it might be to sometimes justify the time or the money to go and experience another part of the world, you know, hunting or fishing, those are experiences that go far beyond the week or the 2 weeks that you spend or the money it costs to do it, because those experiences, those memories last forever. And so I would encourage people, you know, if they're dreaming about a trip, and it doesn't have to be to go to Africa and, you know, shoot a leopard or something. It really can be, you know, go to the Northwest Territories and try and catch a lake trout, or, you know, go to New Brunswick and shoot a woodcock. You know, if those kinds of things are appealing to you, if that's a passion for you, I really encourage people, find a way to make it happen. I don't recommend everybody go to the bank and borrow the money, but it worked for me. And if that's what it takes, don't, you know, I guess you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. Great words of encouragement. And I think, like it was for me, once you take that step and figure out, hey, I can do it. I can make the time and I can cover it and I can make it work with my lifestyle and the people I'm committed to in my life, and often include them, then it does become special, and every trip is very special. Yeah. You know, and we all, you know, the danger of that is when you get home, you immediately start planning for the next one, right? So Absolutely.
So we're all looking down the road too at, you know, where am I going next? Yeah.
Very good talk, Ken. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate your thoughts, your experience, your knowledge in world travel, and for sharing. I don't know how many features and stories and columns you've written over the years, but I'm sure they continue to inspire people that read your work?
Well, it's very kind of you to say, Brad. I hope that's partly true at least. And thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure. I've been a admirer of the podcast for some time, so it's a real personal pleasure to get a chance to participate.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.